Everybody, welcome to another edition of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger, and I've been really looking forward to this episode today. Despite the fact that I no longer actively participate in fantasy football, I actually consume the content quite a bit because it gives me a nice, view around the league. Also, like you could endlessly debate why one player should be above another player. It's also a great way during the season to look at different matchups and different situations. And so, in just a moment, I will be bringing in our special guest, who will be a weekly guest throughout the season, to give us all the answers to your fantasy football questions. Before I do that, I want to go quickly through a couple bits of news, specifically around your Seahawks. As of last night, some updates came out around Pharaoh Brown from his own Instagram account. If you haven't been following there, Pharaoh Brown left practice last week in Tennessee with on a cart, and it wasn't clear what the issue was. And there was a lot of rumors and what it could be. Well, he posted on his Instagram account that he is actually it was in Austin, Texas. He was on crutches, which wasn't the greatest thing to see, but wound up updating that he's hoping to be ready for week one. He's going through some rehab. It looks like it's the bottom of his foot. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to guess what it exactly was, but will be interesting to see, and hopefully good news for us to see what happens with Pharaoh Brown. So that was the one bit. I also gave some updates on the practice report yesterday. Jerome Baker did participate in parts of practice yesterday. I think that's an important note. I want to make sure people knew about that. And I think those were the two most important things. The other thing that I wanted to give folks a quick update on is you guys did it again. You did it again. You keep supporting the show. You keep giving me opportunities to give back as well. And so yesterday, if you missed it, we were able to provide for Uchenna Nwosu and the Uchenna Nwosu Foundation $2,000 in a donation to his charity and his foundation, which helps young kids. And like one of the most recent things they've done, and something that he was very proud of, was donate, I think, over $80,000 back to his high school to help build out a kind of more modern sports medicine facility, sports health training, all these things. And I want to, through what we're doing together, find ways to continue the charity that we've done. It's over $260,000 over the years. Most of that's gone to Ben's fund, and I want that to keep going, even though this is now my full-time job, and I'm going to be taking some income from it as well for the first time this year. The more that we grow, the more that the pie is going to grow, and the more that I will continue to be able to give to charity. I can already tell you I'm going to give at least as much to charity this year. Last year, I think it was $20,000. We'll be able to give at least that much to charity this year. And my hope is to give a lot more. Ultimately, I would love to see us get to where we've donated $1 million. But that's going to take a little while, and it depends on just how big this all gets. So just wanted to thank all of you for the support, and we will have many more of these. And don't you love this massive check? I actually got it. You gave me an excuse to order a massive check off of Amazon. It now sits there at the VMAC waiting for the next donor. I do have to find somebody to write out the names of the foundations every time because my handwriting's awful. So Jessamine McIntyre did most of the writing, although someone on the Seahawks staff helped me with the Uchenna Nwosu Foundation yesterday. I had to madly do it, and that person helped out. So anyway, appreciate all of you. If you haven't already, hit the like button and click subscribe. Now is a great time to do it. Why not? All right. With that, let me bring in our guest. This is someone who I'm just getting to know and excited. I was actually talking to him off camera before the show. Has a great story of how he got into all of this. And so let me, without further ado, bring aboard Mike Randall of FTN Fantasy, who is going to be with us all year long, every week, every Tuesday, to talk about fantasy football. We'll answer your questions, take your comments. We'll preview specific matchups, things that favor or don't favor specific teams and players. But before we get into all that, Mike, welcome to the show, man. How are you doing?
Brian, it is an honor to be here. The work that you've done, the charity, just wonderful stories with an elite fan base, one of the best in the entire NFL. I'm thrilled to be here. I told you offline about my connection. My best friend who's been a lifelong Seattle fan since day one of seventh grade when we met. So I'm going way back here with the Seahawks. Thrilled to be with you all year. It's an honor. It really is.
Well, I can tell from the accent that this is not because you happen to be in the Northwest that your friend became a Seahawks fan. So am I detecting New Jersey, New York?
Yeah, you can't take the New Jersey out of me. Yes, northern New Jersey, New York area is where I'm born and raised. But we do have Seahawk fans over here. They're all over the place, of course. Great franchise. But yes, you nailed it. I gave it away. Not the best poker face when it comes to my voice and accent, for sure.
Well, there's a lot of love here for New Jersey because, as you probably know, that is the one place in the world where the Seahawks walked off a field with a Lombardi trophy. So
100%.
Love it, and welcome to the show. Before we get into the fantasy stuff, tell folks a little bit about you. How did you get into this fantasy football thing?
Sure. I always went into education when I got out of college. I ran track in college. I love sports. I love teaching math. And that's something I did my entire life. Ended up working my way up at a small school called Cresskill up here in northern New Jersey. And I was the superintendent of the school. And then when I got to a certain point, I said, there's some opportunities out there. I love sports. I'm working in administration now. I sort of missed that connection. So I started writing about fantasy football back in 2016. Just a couple articles here and there. My first one was about how Ezekiel Elliott was a bad pick for the Cowboys. Shows you how bad it was. But we've learned from there. We've done a ton of appearances. I've worked for Action Network, 4for4 Football, Fantasy Pros, Player Profiler, and now was fortunate enough and blessed to retire from public education and get this opportunity here with FTN as a chief content officer about 2 years ago. And it's been a fantastic journey. I love every day.
That's cool. I mean, we definitely on this channel love people's career stories, and to go from public education, which is a very noble thing to be doing and great, but also to be able to jump into something like fantasy football. And, I think you also do some stuff around betting as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's fun to just have something that brings people joy and brings people like together. And it's really cool that you've been able to make that leap. Before we get right into some of the topics, we did have, speaking of generosity, Detail Oriented has gifted 10 more Hawk Blogger memberships to other folks. So Detail cannot be stopped. He is a man on a mission, has given hundreds of Hawk Blogger memberships, and I want to thank you this morning for doing that. Also gave us the gimbal. If you saw yesterday, a little bit more of a steady picture while I was doing my camp update. So appreciate you, Detail, as always. If you want to get one of these free memberships, you got to go and click the join button and make sure that gifting is enabled. There's a little 3 dots. You click on it, make sure that gifting is enabled. You could instantly become a Hawk Blogger member. If you want to pay it forward and gift memberships yourself, I highly recommend it. It's a great way to grow the channel, to grow the community, and just bring in a lot more people that could very likely be friends. So really appreciate you, Detail Oriented, as always. All right, Mike. Let's get into it. I can't wait any longer. So as someone who was obsessive about fantasy football in high school, which was like basically when the pioneers were pulling the wagons across the country, but have stayed out of it since. I will probably ask some dumb questions along the way, but the first thing I want to kind of ask you is, like, what are the top stories right now, the top debates going on in fantasy? Like, who are the people that are rising? Who are the people that are falling? Who are the sleepers? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, Brian, as a former educator, there's no such thing as dumb questions. So please keep that in mind.
I'm going to challenge that.
You can bring it on. What's happened, Brian, is now fantasy football has grown so much that there is a natural knee-jerk reaction to what goes on in the preseason. In essence, 3 preseason games, maybe 4 if you include the Hall of Fame in terms of the weeks. So people right now are doing best ball drafts at Underdog. They're starting their own fantasy football drafts last Saturday and this coming Saturday, the two biggest fantasy football draft days of the year. So they're reacting to the latest news. Now, what has gone on recently? Well, first off, we heard about Kenneth Walker, who's one of the risers right now for you guys, because his role seems secure. It's been a positive drumbeat about his 3-down skill set. There was concerns about Zach Charbonnet. How much of a touch share is he going to get? But Kenneth Walker, definitely one of the risers here in Best Ball, who's risen about 3 spots in the last week from where he was being drafted. Other players, the Packers could not look any worse, Brian, than they did against the Broncos recently, which means Jordan Love is valued even more than we thought. He is probably the biggest quarterback riser, up 3 spots from where he was being drafted about a week ago. Other players, you saw the Chiefs. You saw Patrick Mahomes with the behind-the-back pass to Travis Kelce. We saw Isaiah Pacheco obviously being one of the dominant running backs in terms of little competition behind him. We saw Rashee Rice. We don't know about his suspension. Xavier Worthy flying down the field, getting a touchdown. So all of the chief offensive players are rising as well. The last thing I'll say, Brian, is we're hearing news about who's in 2 wide receiver sets and who's in 3 wide receiver sets on the field, which is why a team like Jacksonville, where Christian Kirk was thought to be the number 1 receiver about a month ago, is now seeing Brian Thomas, the rookie, rise because he and Gabe Davis appear to be on the field in 2 wide receiver sets. Now, that could be a little overblown because a team could use 3 wide receiver sets the majority of the time. But those are the things right now that are occurring with the risers, sort of taking that information that we see during the preseason on the limited snaps with the starters and projecting it during the year.
So you went through a bunch of different positions there, and this is my first not stupid question, but just lack of experience lately. So before I actually even answer this question, preface question. So there's PPR leagues and non PPR leagues. What is the majority right now? Do you know what most people play?
Sure. It used to be standard, which was no point for reception years ago, 10, 20 years ago. Now there is always, in most leagues, some sort of bonus for reception. The sort of majority one we use here at FTN is half-point PPR, where every reception you get a half point. So a full point really benefits the receivers and those receiving backs, but half is kind of the sweet spot. So that would be the normal basis when I'm referring to analyzing players, is a half-point PPR setting.
Okay, so then that's really helpful to hear. And so then of the position groups, it sounds like receiver and like when I was coming up, running back was always the primary position you had to nail. It sounds like receiver has now become the standard that you just got to get the best that you can get.
Receivers have bumped up, Brian, because I don't think coaches, and this is the problem that you see with fantasy players versus coaches in the NFL, how they actually use the players. We get enamored with a talented player who does well at the combine. We get enamored with a player whose skill set or whose metrics are off the charts, but they may not be used that way in the NFL. Case in point, last year, Bijan Robinson, top 10 pick. There's no way Arthur Smith is not going to give him the majority of carries. Tyler Algier has 2 touchdowns in week 1, and the rest is history. I believe that the NFL coaches are extremely sensitive to the injury-prone nature of the running back position. So the majority of teams are going to timeshares, 60-40, 55-45, and that has bumped the running backs down. But to your point, if you can find a Christian McCaffrey or a player like that, they are light years ahead of everyone else. You just have to make sure you're right.
Got it. So, talk to me for a second, like who are, and I hopefully this is not, I'm going off script a little bit, but who are like your top 5 running backs? Who are like your top 5 receivers in your rankings?
Sure. I'll start with running back. I have McCaffrey number 1, as almost everyone does. The only thing that stops him, Brian, is injury, because he gets the majority of touches. They paid him to do so. He's great out of the backfield. He's the center of the offense. He's number 1. I'm going to put Breece Hall number 2 over Bijan Robinson. I'm a little concerned that Algier, you heard the coach speak come out, even with the new coaching staff, that Tyler Algier is going to be a central part of this offense. Do we believe that? I don't know, but we've seen enough of it that I'm concerned, and I put Bijan third behind Breece Hall, who at the end of last year with the Jets was just absolutely dominant. Most people don't realize Breece Hall had over 70 receptions last year with Zach Wilson and that horrific cadre of quarterbacks. Now, assuming Aaron Rodgers is healthy, he's not going to be running a lot, Brian. So I think Breece Hall is clearly number 2. Outside of that, one of the most polarizing players in fantasy is Saquon Barkley. Is he going to have his career year with Philadelphia, or is Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, all those players, the tush-push there, without the center, of course, Kelsey, but is that going to limit him? I think he's going to have a massive year. He's number 4. Number 5 for me is Jonathan Taylor with the Colts. We've almost forgotten about Jonathan Taylor, but he should get a majority of rushing attempts on that team. I know Anthony Richardson's there. I know he runs the ball in, but I still think it goes through Jonathan Taylor. And you know as well as I do, when you have a rushing quarterback, the running back usually benefits. So Taylor rounds out my top 5 for running backs.
Got it. And receivers.
So receivers are tricky. Maybe it's because I'm getting older. I get nervous when they hold out. I get nervous when they're not practicing, not just because of the contract issue. Remember, Le'Veon Bell held out the whole year. I don't think anybody's crazy enough to do that again. But I do get nervous if you don't go through practice and you don't go through the preseason and you don't get the normal reps, the injury risk rises. So right now, for my number 1, I have Tyreek Hill. He's there. He's the center of the offense. McDaniel schemes him to get open, short, intermediate, deep. I have him number 1. Number 2, right behind him is Amon-Ra St. Brown. Amon-Ra St. Brown may not be the 6'4", huge outside receiver that we're accustomed to, but that offense is so funneled through him, Sam Laporta, and Jahmyr Gibbs that his target share is so massive. I will take him number 2. Number 3, I have Justin Jefferson there. I know that Sam Darnold at the quarterback worries people, but do you look at Justin Jefferson using our Stats Hub? He's produced no matter who the quarterback is. So I think even if it's Nick Mullins, put Sam and Jamar Chase because of the issues I mentioned. Are they going to be in camp? Are they going to be healthy? Are they going to hold out? They're elite receivers, but I'm Missouri. I'm the show me state. You on the field. The fact that they're still
Hey, Mike, it sounds like we're getting a little bit of lagging with your connection. Are you still with us, Mike?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you might want to back out and come back in. We're just getting near frozen right now. So let's see if dropping out and coming back in solves that problem. Good chance while Mike is trying to fix that connection issue, to talk for a second about the promotion that's available for everybody with FTN. So FTNFantasy.com, you get right now 15% off access to Stats Hub if you use the Hawks promo code, HAWKS. And as I've shared yesterday, really some amazing stuff on there. I think we're going to talk about this with Mike, some of the things that you can get access to that help you with fantasy, but highly, highly recommend it. I would not promote this stuff if I don't think it's great. And there's a QR code on here now. You can scan that, get right to it. Make sure you use promo code Hawks. Less than $9 a month to get this, and I think you'll be very happy. You could definitely earn more than that in fantasy football winnings if you use it properly. So always cool to hear about the different players and strategies here. We're going to get into it in a second with Mike talking about which sorry, there you go, Mark. You back? Good?
I'm back, sir. Yes. I don't know what happened there.
Hey, it's a gremlin in the system. It happens all the time. So I think we heard you had Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then we lost you for the last 3.
Yeah, last 3. I just get nervous, Brian, when they're not in camp. So I had Justin Jefferson third, even though it's Sam Darnold and Nick Mullins. Justin Jefferson is produced no matter what. And similar to Tyreek Hill, Minnesota always schemes to get him open. They'll throw the ball behind the line to him on a slant or deep. My last 2 are Jamar Chase and CeeDee Lamb because they're just not in camp, and I think the holdout is an issue. And I don't like players who don't show up in the preseason because they're not in their regular routine. And I have found that injury risk rises when they're not there. So even though Lamb and Chase are incredible receivers, I put them a notch below because we're about 2 weeks away, Brian. They're still not there yet. So it's starting to make me worried.
Well, I don't want anyone to be injured, but I wouldn't mind if Brandon Ayuk really has a down year. That would be fine with me. All right, so let's talk about Seahawks players for a second. So, a Seahawks slant to this. Who are some of the top Seahawks in your rankings? Are there anyone player that you consider a sleeper that maybe nationally people are not paying close enough attention to?
Well, I'll refer to you and your wonderful fan base here. The overwhelming feeling with fantasy analysts is that Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to quickly be the second option in this offense and push DK Metcalf at the top. We were very impressed with him last year. Remember, he was injured to start the year. Right now, he's wide receiver 43. That is entirely too low. He has crept up and passed Tyler Lockett, who's wide receiver 56, and the chasm is starting to grow. It really is. So Jackson Smith and Jigba is probably the hottest player for Seattle right now, and I expect him to move inside that top 36 wide receivers very shortly. Kenneth Walker, of course, RB16. Since the positive news came out from the coaching staff about him, how they believe in him, he is someone who was sort of under the radar around running back 20. He's now up to running back 16 as well. DK Metcalf is fantastic. Only 66 receptions last year, around 60, I think it was, but we expect a huge bounce back from him. He's wide receiver 21, so sort of headed to that mid-tier wide receiver 2 area. And then the other two questions I have for you, Zach Charbonnet, how much is he going to get a touch share in this offense? He's running back 43, but certainly would benefit from a situation where Kenneth Walker gets injured. It looks like he would be fantastic. And someone I was high on, because the coaching staff made a priority here, signing him, is Noah Fant at tight end. He is tight end 19. I know he's injured, but it looks like he's going to be a go to come back. It's another player we're very high on.
Yeah, Kenneth Walker for me, I think there's a chance Kenneth Walker could end up being a top 5 running back. And so to me, that feels like a really big steal opportunity. I think his reception numbers could skyrocket. How many receptions did Kenneth Walker have last year? Do you have that in front of you?
Pull it up right now. Yep.
I can pull it up. But I think Kenneth Walker has a chance to have, a significant number of receptions this year.
29.
And,
yep.
20, oh my gosh.
29. Yeah.
I would be surprised if he's under 50 this year, and it wouldn't shock me if he's over 60. So you add that to the fact that I think he's going to get a larger share of the carries as well, and I think the Seahawks are going to have a better offensive line and a better offensive coordinator and a better offensive line coach. There's a lot of reasons to think Kenneth Walker is going to have a big year. I think the JSN thing is maybe the worst kept secret at this point because there's no doubt, he is going to be the second fiddle to DK Metcalf, and it wouldn't shock me if he ends up as the high person in terms of receptions on the team. It would surprise me if he had the most yards and most touchdowns, but on the Seahawks. But I think he is going to be a consistent target for Geno Smith throughout the year. So those two make a ton of sense to me.
Yeah, and what's interesting is we use Underdog because that's the one that's had the best bowl drafts going on throughout the summer. To your point about Kenneth Walker, these are the running backs that are going around Kenneth Walker. The following are ahead of him. James Cook, who still has Josh Allen running the ball and did not get the goal line touches last year. Could be Ray Davis, could be Ty Johnson. Rashad White, who was not efficient last year, just got a ton of volume, and they drafted Bucky Irving. Joe Mixon, who's already injured and is certainly up there in age. Then there's Kenneth Walker, who seems like the perfect player around those. Right after him, David Montgomery, who shares snaps with Jahmyr Gibbs, and Alvin Kamara, who has the contract issues. And we saw Taysom Hill get a goal line carry in the preseason. So out of all of those running backs where he's going, how do you not take Kenneth Walker?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Let's actually talk a little bit about sticking with the Seahawks for a second. Obviously, matchups are huge. And the first 2 weeks of the season, the Seahawks are going to be facing the Broncos, and then they're going to be facing the Patriots. Before we get into the specifics of those matchups, what do you look at when you're making lineup decisions? Is it weather? Is it player versus team? Is it defensive? Like, what are the factors that you really consider when you're making lineup decisions?
There are several. The first that I love going to is the DVOA stats here we have with Aaron Schatz at FTN. Not only can he give you defensive DVOA, and again, for those that don't know, DVOA takes a baseline of what the average team would allow in every single down and distance, 2nd and 5, 3rd and 1, and then gives you a percentage in terms of whether your offense or defense has outperformed what the baseline average is. That is critical against the run in the past in terms of defensive, offensive matchups. But the other part is we have DVOA against each wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. And that helps me know, because there are several teams out there, Brian, who guard wide receiver 1s really well and don't guard the other 2 positions very well. So you look for those discrepancies. If you have a little bit of an advantage, just an edge, that can swing you when you have a decision. So those are some of the things I look at. Weather, of course, is important. We have found at FTN that weather is very overrated except for wind. So I don't care about rain. I don't care about snow. Snow is really the best one for offenses because the offensive players know where they're going to go before the defensive players do. So people get scared off because of snow. How many times did you see Tom Brady throwing 70-yard passes to Randy Moss in the snow? So that one is overrated, but wind is something certainly we're going to be concerned with always when we're looking at matchups. But that's the first thing I go to is DVOA, matchups against positions, fantasy points allowed to a certain extent, but that can be skewed depending on your schedule, and of course, weather as well.
So then dialing in here, I mean, obviously we don't know. That's the hard part with especially the first week, the first couple weeks of any season. You don't know how good any team is for sure. With Denver and New England, what are some of the things that stand out for you, either in terms of, are the players you like on Denver that you'd play that first week? And from a Denver defensive standpoint, how do you expect the Seahawks to match up against that team?
Yeah, I think Seattle's in a strong spot here against Denver. I'm glad that game is home. You're certainly going against a rookie quarterback in Bo Nix. I think he's going to be named the starter. He's looked very strong, but there's a difference here. Remember last year, Brian, everybody talked about Kenny Pickett and how great he was going to be with Pittsburgh in the preseason. And what do you have, 5 or 6 touchdown passes the entire year? So it's not as good as Bo Nix looks, and it's strong. It's still his first game. It's still on the road. It's still in Seattle. That's a lot of check marks against the Broncos here. So I would be careful. I'd probably play Javonte Williams if I had him to test out the run defense for Seattle in this first game. But I think that's a great matchup. Yes, their pass defense, specifically the one cornerback, is good for Denver. But I do think that your cadre of weapons with Metcalf and JSN and Lockett and Fant should be healthy. Walker and Charbonnet. That's a lot there. Geno should be able to do some nice work here. So I like Seattle in that matchup. I think that's a good matchup. If it was on the road, I'd be a little concerned. Sean Payton does a great job. You don't know what to expect from Bo Nix, but I think being at home here, I favor Seattle. I think that's a good matchup for them, not only in offense, but defense as well.
Well, I'm going to switch gears on you, and I know a little bit on the betting side as well. As of right now, the Seahawks are, I think they're like, let me pull this up. I had it before. I think they're like 4.5 or 5-point favorites in that game. Yeah, consensus is 4.5, but it's up to 5. Some places it has as much as 5.5. Where are you on that line with the Seahawks?
Well, Seahawks were 8-7-2 against the spread last year. And as a home team, Seattle last year against the spread, just 3-4-1. That's a lot of points for a game early in the season. I have found that I like those underdogs early just because I think the lines are a bit inflated. What we'll have up at FTN is we run our simulations. Every game is run through 10,000 simulations, and we hit it well over 65% last year with our sides. So we'll have that up probably next week. My lean right now is to take those points because it just seems like, those numbers 3 and 7, Brian, just uncomfortable. So if it could get down to like 2.5 or something like that, I'd grab Seattle in a second. But that field goal, getting over that field goal makes me a little bit concerned. So I like Seattle to win the game, but that point's a little too high. We'll see what our model says here at FTN as we get closer, but like to see it a little less only because there's a lot of unknown here.
Yeah, it's one of the largest spreads opening week as I scroll through. I mean, there's 6.5. The 49ers are favored by 6.5 over the Jets.
That's crazy.
That seems wild to me.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yep.
Wild. But then you've got, I think the other one is the Bills favored by 7 over the Cardinals, which I also think is, given the Bills' injury situation and just, I think that's a big number. And then 7.5 The Bengals are favored at home over the Patriots. I mean, I think that they're clearly going to win that game, but I don't know. 7.5 is a lot of points. So, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting to see.
And that's the other thing I've noticed with preseason is you have to decide what's actionable and not actionable ideas and evidence that you've seen. The Patriots offensive line does not look good at all. And so that's something that's one that I'm not going to bet against going into there. That is going to be rough. You want to be able to protect your quarterback, whether it's Brissett or Drake May or whomever. New coach, always going to be a drop off with Bill Belichick. So the Patriots are a team, going to your point, I think is a great second week matchup for Seattle because there is an adjustment period there. And that, if their offensive line isn't strong, that's going to be a problem.
All right. So let's talk just a little bit about general strategy, because I see a lot of debates going on about this among fantasy football experts and fans and players. Who do you take? What positions do you take at what round? How do you kind of go about this? Do you have the same strategy for every draft? Like talk us through kind of how you approach that.
Every draft is its own entity. You don't know where players are going to go. Specifically when you're drafting with your buddies in your home league, something always happens that throws you off. I do like doing drafts on Underdog and sites like that, Best Ball, just to get myself warmed up here. I skew personally towards wide receivers early. The leagues I play in are at least a half point, if not a full point PPR. And Brian, the huge difference is a lot of these leagues, you have to start 3 wide receivers. That's a huge discrepancy between 2 wide receivers and a flex, which could be your running back or your wide receiver, whomever. So I skew wide receiver early, but if I can get an anchor RB, they call it hero RB, anchor RB, where you take a running back first and then don't take a second running back for several rounds, 5, 6, 7 rounds later, and fill in wide receiver, tight end, those other positions. I will do that with Christian McCaffrey. I will do that with Breece Hall. Occasionally Bijan, but it doesn't feel great. But I usually skew wide receiver early. I have found with tight ends that I like to wait on them only because last year, if you look at half point PPR for tight ends, you ended up having the following averages per week: 11.5, 11.5, 11.4, 11.3. So there's not a huge difference between getting an early tight end and getting a later round tight end, unless we're talking about Travis Kelce 3 or 4 years ago, which doesn't exist anymore. So yes, wide receiver early is my default. If I can get a unique running back like Breece Hall or Christian McCaffrey, I will do it. But I want wide receivers because most of the leagues I play in, you have to start 3. And there's just a huge advantage to having 2 or 3 wide receivers that can get 90 plus receptions over your competition. I can find running backs later that I can fill in. I can't find wide receivers later.
So if you had one of the top 3 picks in a draft, who are your top 3 guys that you're choosing?
Very easy, and it's been the majority every time. It's Christian McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, or Amon-Ra St. Brown every single time. And if I get Amon-Ra, I like the fact that the Lions have 14 of their first 15 games indoors, which is where Jared Goff is fantastic. Tyreek Hill, no one can cover him. He's wide open all the time, and they just let him get what he needs to get. And, of course, McCaffrey. But if you take a running back early, like a Christian McCaffrey, you have to handcuff that running back. People sometimes try to handcuff running backs in the middle rounds, like Najee Harris or Jalen Warren of the Steelers. There's no reason to do that because you're not investing a lot in a mid-round running back. But your first 3 picks are where the majority of your fantasy points are going to come usually. So if you take Christian McCaffrey, you have to take the backup, which, by the way, I think is Jordan Mason. I don't think it's Elijah Mitchell, but we can get into that some other time. But that's what I will do is I'll take that running back and I'll make sure to get the backup just in case there's an injury.
When do you take quarterbacks?
I like to wait on quarterbacks. Quick story. My wife, we met on a blind date. We got married. We have 2 beautiful kids. Finally convinced her to do fantasy football, Brian, about a decade ago. And that was the year
Congrats,
she got,
by the way.
She didn't stay because she got Peyton Manning the year he had the 55 touchdowns and was just unstoppable. She stacked him with Demaryius Thomas. Everything looked great. Got to the playoffs. Denver hosted Tennessee. Peyton Manning, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, had 260 yards. She was eliminated after an undefeated season, said, I'm never playing this again, and has not played since. But I usually wait on quarterback. A stat that I found here at FTN You go back each of the last 20 years and you look at the top 3 quarterbacks per ADP that were drafted, the top 3. One of them has massively underperformed each and every year. So I always say find the fraud. Last year, you'd be surprised. The answer was Patrick Mahomes, who was quarterback 8. So he actually was drafted in the top 3 and finished as QB8. You're going to say, oh, well, that's not a big deal. Well, sure it is, because in order to take him, you passed on other wide receivers and running backs that were elite. So I'm a wait on quarterback guy. There's just so much depth at the position. Geno looks great. And I'll tell you this, Brian, for your fans, Sam Howell may be the best backup in the NFL, and he certainly looked good in the preseason. Remember, he was leading the league in passing yardage last year. So if, God forbid, something happens to Geno, you have a good backup in Sam Howell with a lot of weapons, and he has no trouble throwing in the end zone, which we love in fantasy. But whether it's that, Matthew Stafford, who goes very late, Trevor Lawrence, Jared Goff, I tend to take those players. I understand that if you can get a rushing player such as Anthony Richardson, rushing quarterback like Lamar Jackson, that's worth its weight in gold. But I don't like the wide receiver and running back value that I'm passing on to get those quarterbacks.
So it sounds like you would be kind of heavy wide receiver early, unless it's Christian McCaffrey, and then get running backs, maybe after. Maybe are you like wide receiver, running back? Like, is there?
Yeah, I'll mix it up. I've gone 4 wide receivers to start, as crazy as that sounds. If it's a heavy PPR league, I am completely thrilled if I get 2 wide receivers, Isaiah Pacheco, another wide receiver, and Kenneth Walker. I'm thrilled with that start. That is usually my build. So we're looking at 4 wide receivers in the first 6 picks. I will sometimes take a tight end, but it's rare. Only if a player like a Mark Andrews or Trey McBride drops to like round 6 and he's sitting there, and I think it's a great value. But usually through the first 5 rounds, I have at least 3, if not 4 wide receivers and 1 or 2 running backs.
So I'm a subscriber to FTN Fantasy. I was a subscriber before I worked with you guys. I was a subscriber to Football Outsiders when Aaron had DVOA over there. And when he moved here, that's what brought me to FTN Fantasy. I have been like amazed by the amount of content and data that's up there. And so I was wondering if I actually can share my screen if you want, but is there a part of the site that you'd point people to that, helps? Like, I'll share my screen just so you can see what I'm seeing right now. And we'll put this up for everybody to see. Let's see if this is the best way to do it.
Yep.
So this is looking at preseason projections, in a half-point PPR league and some of the rankings for these players here. We're obviously not going to give away the whole kit and caboodle, but to give people an idea, what are some things people can find on this site that will help them win their leagues, make good decisions in their draft, and then, ultimately, their lineups each week?
We have surveyed, Brian, our subscribers and asked them what they find most valuable. The answer for getting ready for drafts is cheat sheets and rankings. They say it all the time. So Jeff Radcliffe has there, if you go to fantasy, Jeff has his draft kit, the second one down below Stats Hub. Yep. And he has cheat sheets in there and rankings for every possible situation. Yeah, the rankings, projections, values, cheat sheets, ADP, anything that you would want. That is something that's extremely popular. IDP, individual defensive players. So you can pull up your cheat sheet for whatever format you have, PPR, non-traditional, whatever it is, you have it there. The other options, of course, are Aaron Schatz with his DVOA, which is fantastic, where you get into how teams have done in the past. You can go offensive DVOA. Go down to offensive DVOA. Yeah, all the way down. Yep, right there. You go down to offensive DVOA, and you can look. And if you sort there by rank, that third column rank, yep, you can see right there that you end up getting to how the teams are doing each year, who ranked first, who was second. I think it was first San Francisco and Miami, probably. Yeah, there they are. San Francisco, Miami, Buffalo, Baltimore, just how they're doing against the pass and against the rush. And of course, the last thing is our Stats Hub, which we just launched, which is just data that you can find no matter what. If you go down to tools.
Oops.
Yeah, across the top there. Yep.
Tools. There we go.
There is tools. And you'll see it's one of the first boxes that pops up there, Stats Hub. Yeah, third one from the right.
Third one from the right.
Across
there we
the
go.
top. Yep.
Stats Hub. Yep.
We have charted data going back years, 2017, 2018. And one of the things I love already is that we can look at red zone. So I ended up searching before we came on here. We ended up going to, you can go to passing off. Yep.
Passing.
Offense. No, go back to player. Yep.
A player.
Yep. And then you should be able to search by passing. Yeah. Across the top. It should be right across the top there. Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I was not scrolled up. There we go. My bad.
Sure. And you
So
go
there's
to
passing.
Go to advanced.
Go to advanced.
Yep. And now go down to the base there, the title, and arrow over until you get to red zone. Right at the top, it says basic and base. You can push to the right.
Yep. So scroll
click on
over.
base. Yeah.
Click on
and
base.
Then yep. And now push to the right. Use your arrow buttons.
Oh, got it.
Yep. There you go. Red zone. And if you see EZ, click on the letters EZ right below, and then go descending. Sort by descending. You got it. Perfect. So you can see right off the bat, this is one of my favorite things. We want quarterbacks in fantasy, Brian, that throw into the end zone. And it sounds crazy. What quarterback doesn't throw in the end zone? Some are very worried about interceptions. But take a look right there. Dak Prescott threw 67 passes into the end zone. That's 14 more than Jordan Love. So if you're looking at receivers, a Brandon Cooks late, a Jake Ferguson at tight end, that could be a huge tiebreaker for you. Jordan Love, 53 end zone passes, certainly great for him in a great Packer offense. Baker Mayfield. And how about the two quarterbacks for Seattle? Sam Howell does not care. He'll throw in the end zone 47 times, and Geno Smith 45. So these are some of the little nuggets that you can glean here from our site that can help you win your leagues. You want receivers on teams with quarterbacks that are not afraid to throw in the end zone, and you have two of them in Seattle.
Awesome. I am dropping this link into chat because I'm sure people will want to get access to this right away. But I've been blown away since Stats Hub launched about all that is available here. But I think we're going to get this throughout the year. If you haven't already, sign up at FTNFantasy.com using promo code Hawks to get access to this stuff with the 15% off. You're under $9 a month for this, and it could definitely do more than that. And for me, who's been obsessed with stats forever, I've looked at all. I've looked at PFF, I've looked at Sports SIS. I looked at getting an SIS account. It was like $5,000 or $6,000 a year to get access to the kind of charting data that you now have access to at FTN Fantasy for less than $9 a month. And I just think it's great. So I want as many people to know about it as possible, and appreciate the work you guys are doing over there.
Yeah. And Brian, one other thing too, which is exciting, is we cater to whatever you want. So for example, some people don't want to go through all this. They just want to hop in Discord and message Jeff Radcliffe and say, Jeff, who am I starting here? We have access to those Discords, those communities, those conversations. So if you're someone who needs quick answers, drop it in the Discord. We'll get you an answer right away within seconds. If you want to research yourself, you have that ability. If you want to look at cheat sheets and see where people are ranked, we have that as well. So we cater to whatever you want. You'll be able to find your routine every week as you set your lineups on Sundays.
That's cool. I didn't know about the Discords. I think that's a great additional value and a cool thing to have. All right. So we've got questions that have been submitted by our YouTube members, by our Patreon members, patreon.com/hawkblogger. Had a bunch of new folks join lately and want to thank them for doing that, as well as a ton of new YouTube members. One of the benefits is you get to ask questions to Mike every week. First one comes from Braxton, one of our Patreon members. He says, what is your opinion on the zero running back strategy in a fantasy league for PPR?
I'm fine with it because I'm a zero RB zealot. And my reason, Braxton, is that I think you can find great running back value late. I think you can get a player like a Brian Robinson, who I think is going to be the goal line back for a Washington team with a rushing quarterback in Jaden Daniels. I love the Chargers running backs. I know there's two of them in Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, but when Jim Harbaugh was coaching the San Francisco 49ers, Frank Gore every year, 1,200 yards. To find that value late, you can't. I can't get you a wide receiver later in the draft, Josh Downs, Rashid Shaheed, who's going to give you elite weekly production. But I can find running backs that I think will be really close. So I'm fine with 0RB, and I like using it often.
All right, next question comes from Mark Zuck, also a Patreon member. I tried to mock a draft and ended up with Tyreek Hill, Derrick Henry, Evans, Kelsey in the first 4 rounds. This feels like my dad's army. How worried should I be about age with these picks?
Listen, the age curve is always a question, but I have lost a lot of leagues in the last few years doubting Mike Evans. And Mike Evans just continues to produce with Tampa Bay. My suggestion is, if you're really concerned about the age curve with some of these players, don't be afraid to handcuff a wide receiver position. So, for example, 3rd-round draft pick Jalen McMillan out from you guys in Washington there, 22 years old, elite speed, elite catch radius, projects to be the 3rd wide receiver in Tampa Bay. So if you are concerned about the age curve with Mike Evans, who produces every single time, every year he's out there, he has 1,000 yards, don't be afraid to use a later pick on Jalen McMillan. See how the season goes for the first 5 or 6 weeks, and you hold on to him. It's your last pick. It's one of your last 2 picks, but it could really benefit if Evans gets hurt. That way you have the security, and you're not afraid to draft a player who's a little bit over the age curve for you. The other player I'll talk about in that list is Derrick Henry. There is no way that Derrick Henry's not getting double-digit touchdowns with the Ravens unless he gets injured. I do think they're going to work other running backs in because they got him, Brian, because they couldn't run against the Chiefs. So we know they're going to make sure he's healthy for the playoffs and later in the year. But you don't sign Derrick Henry to $20+ million and not give him the ball at the goal line. So as much as he's old, he's also really safe. And if you want to take a running back early, he's not a bad choice.
Next question comes from Jordan, who is also a Patreon member. Who are your most underrated running back picks for this season?
I mentioned a couple already, Brian Robinson and the Chargers duo, both of which are drafted late. Brian Robinson's ADP is over 100 right now. So we're talking about round 8, round 9. That's a minimal investment. Both Chargers running backs, people are fearful of them. You shouldn't be. One of those running backs is going to be fantastic because Harbaugh is committed to running the football, and that's what I want. I want a commitment to what I see with a running back, and you know he has it there. Another player I think is someone I try to get as much as possible who's going after Gus Edwards and after Brian Robinson is Blake Corum. Kyron Williams is not an elite metric running back. He's got 4.5 speed. He's not very big. He stepped into a great situation last year. He's also had 3 ankle injuries in the last 2.5 years. And what did they do? They took Blake Corum with an early round pick in the draft. Blake Corum has been hyped as a 3-down back. We have not seen him, Brian, in the preseason. I wonder why that is. Last year, we didn't see a lot of Puka Nacua either. So maybe they believe in him, and he's a player who could easily end up being a top 12 running back if the right situation occurs. And the last one, which doesn't feel great, Rico Dowdell of the Cowboys. He seems to be the lead running back there, and he's available at RB 38. You're telling me the lead running back for the Cowboys isn't going to be a top 36 running back? I kind of think he is. He could be better than that. So Rico Dowdell, another one I'm taking there, round 10 and 11, late in drafts.
Is it true, Mike, that they've invented a new position for Ezekiel Elliott called the walking back as opposed to the running back?
I can't draft Ezekiel Elliott. I can't. And Brian, I know they may give him the ball at the goal line, but give me Derrick Henry rounds early. I can't with Ezekiel Elliott anymore.
That guy, I like you can see each leg move in front of the other at this point in his career. It's not good. Okay, next question comes from Alvi, who is a Patreon member. Who will be the breakout running backs and wide receivers this year that are non-first round picks?
Well, I mentioned Jalen McMillan, who's a very deep sleeper, who just needs an injury, and he can really shine and get you weekly performances, wide receiver 3 or better. One of our great assets at FTN is Two Gun. He's won the Millie Maker 5 times in DFS, won $1 million 5 separate times with his lineups, and he has been pounding the table for DeAndre Hopkins, another one of the age wide receivers that we talked about. But DeAndre Hopkins has not hit the curve as bad as some other players. So in a Tennessee offense that's going to pass the ball a lot, he seems to be a bit of an afterthought. He's a great value, can easily be a top 20 wide receiver this year. And I believe I'm going to stick with my priors. I believed in Cooper Kupp when Matthew Stafford came over and it paid off in a big way, Brian. I believe in Christian Watson. He had a hamstring problem where there was an imbalance in the strength of his hamstring that was just discovered this summer. But the last 2 years when he's been on the field, he catches touchdowns over and over again. I believe, just like Chris Carter did with the Vikings years ago, I think this Packers offense is going to be great. And I think Christian Watson is the best receiver on that Packers team. I'm talking about 80 catches, double-digit touchdowns, 7 to 10 double-digit touchdowns in that area. And he's going after Jaden Reed. So I like Christian Watson as well as a huge breakout wide receiver. For running backs, if you're looking for breakouts, there's been a lot of talk about Chase Brown in Cincinnati. The offensive team is really praising him. Could he be an Austin Eckler light in that offense with Joe Burrow, who doesn't like to run? It's possible. He has a lot of explosive upside. So those are the players that I'm looking at. DeAndre Swift with the Bears looked really good in the preseason as well, and he got off to a hot start. So again, as you hear me talking, there's just so many running backs that I think could do great things in those mid to late rounds, which is why I skew wide receiver early in my drafts.
All right, Alvy comes back with another question here, Mike. Top 5 PPR running backs.
CMC, we talked about. Breece Hall, of course, over 70 receptions with you and I as quarterback last year. Saquon Barkley's fantastic. You have to decide whether you think the tush push is going to negate some of his strengths, but he should catch the ball in the backfield. The Atlanta staff, even though they like Tyler Algier, is still talking about Bijan Robinson catching a lot of passes. And the other one I'm going to is Isaiah Pacheco. And that's not just the New Jersey bias in because he went to Rutgers. I don't see any competition to him in the backfield. Deneric Prince, just Clyde Edwards-Helaire is hurt now. I don't see the competition. They've talked about him as a 3-down back catching passes. Yes, he runs angry. Yes, there's injury risk, but there are a lot of worse things than to be the starting running back with Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback. So I actually have Pacheco top 5, which may surprise some people.
All right, Mike. Last submitted question. Then we've got some questions in chat we will get to that I see. I see you, chat. I see you, chat. We're going to get you in order. I'm prioritizing people that submitted their questions ahead of time. So thank you for all that did that. This comes from Michael Fawcett, who is a YouTube member and a great one at that. He says, I'm just curious if you have a particular draft strategy this year. Draft wide receivers early and often, hero running back, or more balanced approach?
It comes down to your belief. And I think you have to have a strategy, which Jeff Ratcliffe talks about all the time at FTN. If you believe that Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes is going to have that big of a year, then you can take a quarterback early. You just have to be right. If you believe that the top wide receivers, like I do, are just that much better than the majority, the interquartile range wide receivers in your draft, then you take wide receivers early. And if you think there's a running back or two that could be that much better, you make that choice as well. So any strategy can work. You just have to look inside yourself and say, what do you think is going to happen this year? I am on record as saying the elite wide receivers are that much better than everyone else. I'm on record as saying that there's a lot of great quarterback values later in the draft. So I'm going to wait personally. And I also tend to wait on tight end because I think they're very bunched up. So my answer to that question would be you decide what you feel is going to happen this year and draft accordingly, because that's what it is. It's a game within a game, and it's going to come down to what you think is going to happen. Come up with a plan, draft accordingly, and see if it works out.
All right, we got a couple chats here I want to get to. This is from War Chief 12 Brain, which as far as misspellings, which happens a lot. Brain is not the worst misspelling to have as a name option, but I've got that through my life. But I know you're talking to me, War Chief. He says, this is my first show as a member of your channel. I love your content and your passion for the Seahawks. I followed Old School Seahawk over here from another Hawks show that I enjoy. Well, welcome to the channel. Great to have you as a member, and aloha. I think I were getting that from you before, so right back at you. Here is a question from Camules. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Santana, who's also a new member, says, hey, Brian and Mike, thanks for doing this. I'm in a keeper 10-man league, number 5 pick this year. Oh, man. 5. I don't personally like being in the middle. I like it
Right.
either end personally.
Yes.
Keepers are Gibbs, 2.6, Puka for 10, Achan for 11, and I'm aiming for JJ at number 5. How would your round 3 to 4 look?
Boy, that's a great question. He's got some risk there with Gibbs and A-Chain because I don't like running backs early. He's going to keep them. I get it. So what I would look for is to try to sprinkle in later in the draft some goal line backs just to offset that with Gibbs and A-Chain and make sure you get those touchdowns. I think with only you have Puka at 10 and you have JJ at 5, I would definitely look to add a wide receiver in round 3, 4. And I would also consider if there's an elite tight end there, an elite tight end, I wouldn't mind grabbing that either because I think you're strong at running back. You're strong at wide receiver. Depending on how many wide receivers you start, I would definitely grab at least one wide receiver in rounds 3, 4. If there's not an elite tight end, then I'm probably deferring to either running back or wide receiver. But I would like to see you get some of those goal line backs later in the draft just to offset because A-Chain and Gibbs, it may be Monty and Mostert. Wouldn't mind getting Mostert, by the way, and handcuffing those backs there with the Dolphins if you can get them.
All right, Mike. This is from Peter Serrano. Says, can someone explain the zero running back concept like I'm a 5-year-old?
Peter, 30 seconds like I'm back teaching again. Running backs are deep. No one is really getting the majority of touches. So the wide receivers, the elite wide receivers matter more. So you're going to wait on getting running backs to later in the draft. You're going to load up on wide receivers, maybe a tight end early, 4 or 5 rounds, and then you're going to grab a bunch of running backs late and figure one of them will hit, much like Kyron Williams last year with the Rams.
All right, we're rounding out the hour here, Mike. Smokehawk, Chris Neslin says, Mike, as a Seahawks fan, which Hawks should we try to avoid drafting? Homers need help choosing with our minds instead of our hearts.
Brian, I'm going to ask for your help on this one. My gut reaction is Tyler Lockett. As much as Tyler Lockett's been fantastic, I do think JSN is going to have a breakout season. So with him and DK Metcalf, I don't know if I want to go to Tyler Lockett to get exposure. I'd rather have Walker. I'd rather have DK. I'd rather have JSN and even wait a little longer for potentially Noah Fant than getting Lockett. But tell me if I'm wrong. You're the expert.
Yeah, I think Lockett and Charbonnet would be the two guys to be careful with. And the thing that I think people, even inside Seattle, are not fully aware of yet is that everyone talks about JSN taking over for Lockett in terms of targets and snaps potentially. I think Jake Bobo is also going to put pressure on Lockett's snaps, not just as a receiving target, but because Jake Bobo is the best blocking receiver on the team, and I think they really want to establish the run. So that could just have Lockett off the field a little bit more, and that's going to affect his value. So I think there's a few things working against Tyler Lockett. That would be the number one piece. I know quarterbacks aren't the most valuable thing. I think Geno Smith belongs on sleeper lists. I think he could end up being one of the more valuable quarterbacks. And I think the great thing is you should, just like the Seahawks got a bargain with him, I think a lot of people could potentially get a nice bargain with Geno Smith late in the draft.
Chris, when I've done my best, when I've done my best ball drafts, Brian, I've gotten Geno Smith and I always grab Sam Howell with the last pick, because I think this offense is going to put up points. As I showed before with Stats Hub, Geno likes to throw to the end zone. You have a ton of receivers. He's got a big arm. Couldn't agree more.
All right. Garth Knight with a super chat. This will be our last, I believe. Thank you, Garth, for the super chat. Mike, thanks for coming on the channel. Can you give me a George Pickens forecast with and without Russell Wilson?
From what I hear from the Pittsburgh insiders, they don't want to move off of Russell Wilson because they are concerned about the turnovers with Justin Fields. Justin Fields has the sex appeal, the big arm. He runs. He also holds the ball too long. He turns it over. He takes sack. Per FTN Stats Hub, he held the ball longer than any quarterback last year. So they're going to be reluctant to move off of Russ. You guys know Russ well. They brought him in to manage the game. He throws a great deep ball. He did well with Cortland Sutton last year. So with Russ in the lineup, I like George Pickens because I don't think they're getting Ayuk. So he should get a dominant target share as a big receiver with 4.33 speed. If Justin Fields comes in, again, I think he gets targeted a lot more, but I think his production on a weekly basis becomes even more volatile because I don't think Fields is as consistent as Russ. With Russ, I like Pickens. I have him a lot in underdog fantasy drafts. If it's Fields, I think week to week, he's a high volatile play, but I worry about the consistency. You saw what happened with Darnell Mooney, who was up and down with him. So I like Pickens, but I think if you have Pickens, you want Russ on the field, even though he may be a little more conservative because the turnovers should be less.
All right, Mike. Got to give some shout outs here. KJab has just given 5 more Hawk Blogger memberships. KJab, I think it's the first time we've interacted. So, man, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I love this. Is my favorite thing that people do. It's a great way to be generous to others as well as support the show. And I think that everybody that gives ends up doing it more than once because it feels good and people really appreciate it. And you make some friends that get a gift from you that you didn't know. It is a great way to kind of have a, Russian roulette of making a new contact out in the world that shares a passion for the Seahawks like you do. So thank you, KJab, for that. Mike, man, this has been amazing. This is part of why I wanted to partner with you guys at FTNFantasy.com. Promo code Hawks gets you 15% off, Stats Hub, access to things like all this fantasy stuff. This is the week to join to get the maximum amount of value out of this because everyone's doing their fantasy drafts coming up right now, and all the cheat sheets, all the data, all the stuff is there, as well as these Discord communities that you can ask questions and get immediate answers to. So it's under $9 a month with the discount, I think, is just a no-brainer.
I appreciate it. We're excited. We're doing robust content, ready to roll this weekend. We can't wait. Things are going very well at FTN. Please join the family. Brian, this is an honor. I can't wait to come back next week. This has been fantastic here. Really excited to partner with you and all the great work that you do as well.
Oh, man, I can't wait. It's going to be fun. Mike Randall from FTN Fantasy will be with us every week. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, everybody, for joining us at Hawk Blogger Mornings. This is episode 149. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Hawk Blogger, and I will be with you this afternoon for a practice report. And keep an eye on who I get as the next interview request this afternoon. That will post as well. Until then, take care. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you again, Mike.
Thanks.